All right, it's live.
Hi guys, name is Elias Nahum. I'm gonna talk about Mattermost localization, right? Uh, we built Mattermost to support different languages in terms of uh, to be able to show it in different languages for our users. So basically, what we need to know is the localization process itself. The first thing that we want to do is include uh, default English strings into the code, meaning that in case that the other languages doesn't have that string specifically, it will show in the UI or in the console or whatever you need to show a string. Uh, it will be localized. If it doesn't exist, then it will fall back to English. So to add localization strings, we basically do it in two different places apart from the code. And that's for the server side, we have the files in a platform i18n directory, and for the web app, it's platform web app i18 directory. So if we take a look at these links, right, this one's for the server. So you'll see that here we have all the files for the support languages, right? And if we do the same thing for the other one, this one is for the web app, and again, it's all the files that contains translations for the supported languages. So after that, what you do is like you code, then add the translations to the code, add the translations to those en JSON files, and after that, you submit the PR to the platform repo. So what happens then is every day at 12 p.m. London time, let's say, right? There's a synchronization process that grabs everything from the platform repo, puts it in. It will put it in the translation server, so people can start translating, right? And after that, every Monday we have an automatic PR that is submitted against the platform repo at 10 p.m. London time, right? And after that PR goes in, people from the community can review those languages in that PR, and if that everything is okay, we'll merge it and we'll have it. So what are the actual components of localization? We have, first of all, we have to code with localization support, either in the server or the web app. Then the translations are done basically by you or any other community member for a specific language using the translation server, which is this one. Well, in this case, it's Spanish, but I'm gonna show it to you guys. Okay. We have all these languages right now, but the ones that are actively translated and you can find them in Mattermost are like Spanish, Brazilian, Portuguese, both of the Chinese, German, Japanese, French, Russian, and Dutch and Korean. There's also support for any other one of the any other language, but you should join in, start translating, and then when it comes to I don't know, probably 90 to 100%, we'll include it in our platform repo. Okay, let's go back and The other component that it's here is like the synchronization. The synchronization of the translations occur automatically, and as I said before, and this will be like both ways, right? From the repo to the translation server and then back. So as I told you before, translations directory are for the server side are in platform IATN directory. And what you can, like, when you're going to write code for translations in the server side, you need to be aware of two things. First thing is that we have a utils.t function, which basically is used to localize messages that appears in the log or in the console. And the context t function, it's actually used to localize messages that are going back to the clients, meaning that the users will be able to see them and understand them depending on the context, like depending on the language that they're using in their current context. So we have different types of localization strings, and normally you have like a simple, or let's say without any variables strings. That's actually just I'm gonna tell you like how do each one of them is or how do you create them in a few moments. But so far, things that you need to understand is that there are three kinds of translations that can occur, right? Without variables, with variables, and if you need to use like pluralization, meaning in one of the contexts you'll say something like you have one message or you have 5 messages, right? So if we want to take a look at the difference of them, right, you'll see that we have different kinds of translations. This one, for instance, this is the JSON object that you will include in the enJSON file. And this one actually has a variable in it that will be replaced, right? And variables are set with a double curly braces, a dot, and then you input the name of the variable that you're going to replace, right? If there's no variables, then just omit this curly braces and the object in the JSON file will be exactly the same, but without the curly braces and the dot here. If you need to translate or have a translation with pluralization, then you can write it this way, right? Which is, and I should probably say this before, like the object has an ID, which is used by the utils.t function, the context.t function, to identify which of the strings needs to be translated, or use the translations from each of the like the different files. So the different files will have the same ID, and what will change is the actual translation message that's going to be in the different languages. So back again to pluralization here. So you have, as you can see here, both have ID. Obviously, they're different. In this case, the translation has like this one key, which is gonna be the translation when you have just one, and when the other is actually the plural one, which is what's gonna be what's gonna be translated when you have more than one. So if you can see in this case, it's just like show the count number in this case it's going to be one, so it's one file sent and then the name of the file. But in this case, it's using files as in plural, so the mechanism is smart enough to identify if it's for singular or plural and use either of those. And how do you replace those variables then in the code itself? So here's an example, right? And you'll see that in this case, we're using c.t. c.t here is the context.t function. We pass the ID of the string that we want to translate, and then we pass as an argument map string of interfaces with the name of the variable that we're gonna replace and actually the actual value, right? So in case this is like a pluralization string, the concept is the same. Like we just pass the ID and the map of strings interfaces here, and will be replaced in the actual string. Moving on, we have the same thing, but for the web app, which is the client interface the client that we're using, right? Which is actually reading React. If you saw our previous brown bag, you're already familiar with that. If not, I encourage you to go and watch it. So the difference here is that the translators are sitting in this directory, like platform web app IATN. The other one was platform IATN, right? And all of the things that's different here is because we're using React. So there are custom, like there are a few React components, that are already in place for you to use them. One of them is the formatted message. There's a couple of others to format time, which are formatted date and formatted time. There's also a couple more that are formatted HTML message that it replaces or it uses translations, but you can include HTML in them. We encourage you to not use them and try and avoid them when possible. And there's another one that if you go through our code, you'll see it in different places, which is define messages, that it's used to include those messages using the context of React, and we're actually trying to move away from that. So try and avoid it, please. And then there's some places where you cannot use like the React component. So we created this function that I'm gonna show you guys. Like this function in our utils, like it's called localize message. That this will let you like use the same ID to identify which string should be translated, and this is like the fallback in case it doesn't have, like the translation files doesn't have that ID, right? Take into account that with formatted message, formatted date and time, you can pass in variables to be replaced. But with the localized message function, you will only be able to translate simple strings with no variables in them. Okay, so we have the same thing as we have in the server side. In the client side, we also have translations that can include, that can be simple with no variables, simple with variables, and pluralization too, right? So I'm gonna give you a couple of examples here so you can see how is it done in the code. Okay, so this is in the code, and then I'm gonna show you the actual EN file, the EN JSON file that holds all the translations, right? So in this case, we're using the format message component. And as you can see, we pass in a couple of parameters. The first one is the ID, which basically is the same ID that you will find in the translations files. And then if that file contains this ID, it will replace this default message with the actual translation. But if it doesn't have it, it will use this default translation as the translation to show. So if you remember at the beginning of this presentation, I told you that you should write in your code, you should include English strings, right? Because they're used as default. So this is the case where you're going to write everything in English, and then it will get translated if it finds this ID on the actual translation file for the language that you want to show this. So in this case, this is a little bit more advanced. I'm gonna show you first this one, and then I'll go back to the other one. So in this case, so it's the ID, the default messages, and then you pass in an object of values, right? So the object of values, as a key, it has the same variable that you're gonna change here or you're going to replace there, right? And the actual value. So basically, this message will say something like OS and then the name of the OS, right? Could be Windows, could be Macintosh or whatever, right? But also you can do things like this, and this is the more advanced stuff. So you can define a variable that it's actually a component, and that component, in this case, is to format date, right? And that component will be replaced here in each of the variables here, right? And it will show as a whole string. So in this case, if you need things like this, it's also possible, right? And in case of pluralization, right? In case of pluralization, you're going to write the name of the variable as you saw before, just like this, like the name of the variable, right? You will say that it's a plural one. Okay, so for when it's one, it will show this string here, which says message, and if in case it's more than one, it will show messages, right? So that I can show you probably here. This is the actual JSON file that holds all the localization, and this is for plural. So in this case, the message will read something like one, then sorry, let's say okay, let's start with 0, right? So it will say something like 0 channels, right? Because it's saying, like, in the case of what's the value of the variable, which is count, which is 0, and if it's equals to 0, then it will show this, right? 0 channels. But if it's 1, right, 1, it will show one channel. Okay, and if it's 5, it will say like five channels, right? So that's the way it works with pluralization. So that way you can actually write code for our server side, also for the web app, and every string that you need to be localized, it can be accomplished doing one of those steps. So after all the code is in, it has to be translated somehow, and that somehow is using our translation server, right? So probably I'm gonna show you guys how it's done. I'm gonna use, like, this is the translation server, right? So if you're working in a different language than English, that's why you're gonna be here, right? So in my case, it's for Spanish. What I'm gonna show you, like what happens with Portuguese. In this case, it's saying like it's 99% translated. You need to translate 162 words, and there's a critical translation here that's going on that was translated before, but now it has some kind of problems. So let's take a look at what's going on here, and let's see if we can fix that. Okay, so in this case, this is the actual translate, like string to translate, which is in English, right? And this is the one that we're translating right now. So you can see that here you have something like, it says like critical errors. You have problems with the escapes. So if we take a closer look, we can see like here we have this part of the string that says domain. We have 4 backslashes and the username, right? And in this case, I can see here that we have only 2. So I'm going to add them, right? And I think there's also 2 more here. I'm going to submit this, and it's done. So now we have 50 more words to translate, which I'm not going to do because I don't know much of Portuguese, but the critical error disappears, right? So after all this is done by you or any other of the community members, right, then a PR is gonna take place automatically and take that back to our repo. So basically what happens here is like all of the English code, it's in our GitHub repo. So as I told you at the beginning, or almost at the beginning of the presentation, like every day at at 12 p.m. London time, we will grab that code from the repo. It will grab every translation file that it's in there, either for the server or the web app. It will run a couple of scripts, translate it will in a way that it will convert that to some sort of file that the translation server understand. It will put all the strings in the translation server, so that way people will join the translation server, translate those strings, and then every Monday at 10 p.m. London time, there's another script that's going to be run that will wrap all those translations, convert them into those JSON files, and then push a PR back to our platform repo in GitHub, right? So that way you will be able to review that, and after the review is complete, it will be merged to master. Is that the case? Or in case that if we are in the release cycle, will be merged against that release branch that we have every couple of months. And yeah, I think that's it. Basically, what else to say is that please join us in our community server. That's prerelease.mattermost.com, and join our developers and localization channels if you want to share your work, or even if you have any doubts and need some kind of help. We'll be there to assist you in any way we can. Thanks. So thanks for watching. I hope this presentation helps you to understand the way localization works within Mattermost.